This is Democracy Watch. Mark, we have done over 150 episodes of Democracy Watch, but for those watching, if you're watching this right now, trust me, you'll want to hear what I'm about to ask Mark. So this issue has gone completely unreported. If Trump is elected, he will reissue Schedule F. That's his executive order that would reclassify at least 50,000, but likely hundreds of thousands of federal employees as political appointees, which would mean that the entire federal government becomes a branch of the Trump White House, completely loyal to him. So my question here is, what happens if the rank and file, for example, at the DOJ become an extension of the White House and Republicans introduce bogus election fraud cases that could suddenly be legitimized by MAGA sycophants at the DOJ, and suddenly they do agree, for example, to throw out legitimate ballots in Philadelphia or Milwaukee or Detroit like they tried to do in 2020, but obviously didn't have the means to do so then?
Yeah, so first of all, I'm glad you're doing this episode because the most dangerous part of Project 2025 is what you're talking about. You know, it is one thing to say that Donald Trump is going to, impose this policy or that policy.
Right.
Who the hell knows? Donald Trump doesn't know what he believes in policy, so maybe he will, maybe he won't. But what he does know is how to exercise raw power. And he knows that for him, exercising raw power is about the loyalty of the people. And so this plan to convert, and I think you're right, it won't be 50,000, it will be hundreds of thousands of Trump loyalists, to put them in place of career civil servants is the key power to his plan. And there is nothing he cares more about than corrupting free and fair elections. So what happens if he does this? What happens if he puts in place federal prosecutors and FBI agents who issue warrants to seize voting equipment, to seize ballot boxes, to then create grand jury subpoenas over election materials? What happens if he does that? We are in uncharted constitutional crisis mode at that point. I worried about this some in 2020. There was some discussion that he would try to impound voting equipment or election results. And we now know from some of what has come out since then that those were the kinds of things that the Jeffrey Clarks and the Donald Trumps and the Trump sycophants that they mused about, right? They mused about sending a letter to Georgia falsely claiming that DOJ had concerns about fraud. Well, what happens if there are no guardrails? We are into a world in which I shudder to think what will happen to free and fair elections, because the power of federal prosecutors to execute, to send grand jury subpoenas is basically their signature. The ability of them to get search warrants is a little bit more than that, but I worry.
That raises the obvious question here, which is, if you're a Democrat, how do you ever win elections again in the future as a Democrat if baseless, fraud cases are legitimized and the federal government humors the most autocratic impulses of a Trump White House?
Yeah, so, let's just play this out, okay? You've got a campaign that, for president or the midterm elections even in 2026, and Donald Trump believes he can control the entire federal government. He replaces members of the Federal Election Commission, and they pass rulings that advantage only Republicans and disadvantage only Democrats. He tells the Federal Communications Commission to clamp down on television stations that are providing opportunities for Democratic outside groups to run ads, and is using soft power in the administration to pressure media conglomerates to advantage Republicans. Right? Before you even get to the election day, right? Think of all the levers of power. He tells the Department of Justice to issue subpoenas and open criminal investigations into Democratic candidates and leaks that to the media or announces it to the media. Right? That's before you get to the kinds of stuff you're talking about on election day. It is terrifying. People don't realize that what Donald Trump wants, what Project 2025 talks about, is the President of the United States controlling the actions of every individual in the federal government, in the executive branch. From what broadcast stations get their licenses renewed at the FCC, what media outlets can merge or buy television stations at the FTC. The amount of pressure he can bring to bear on just the media environment is extraordinary. And that's before you get to the Federal Election Commission and its regulation of campaign finance, or the Department of Justice, the IRS, and what he can do with audits of enemies. And of course, he has a network of right-wing attorneys general around the country who he can also work with and have them execute state power to also interfere in the way in which elections are conducted. It is, Brian, I've been doing this for 30 years. And the easy thing for me would be to say, you know what, I've done this a long time. I've won a lot of cases. I won the cases in 2020, and I'm ready to go write books and do other stuff. But I'm still in this fight because this is the worst I've ever seen it. This is the most terrified I've ever been about what we face if Donald Trump is back in the White House.
Simply put, is this the kind of thing that would be kind of a fast track to autocracy where there's really no obvious way back?
Yeah. I mean, that's what Project 2025 is about. That's what, when Donald Trump says he wants to be dictator for a day, it's not for a day, right? And what Project 2025 is about insulating him as president from any accountability. Now, the Supreme Court already did him a big favor on that front by saying there can be no criminal sanction. We know that there would not be a successful impeachment effort because we know Republicans, he controls the levels of power in the Republican Party in Congress. So, if that takes out of the agenda, those mechanisms of accountability, and then you give him the power to control what the federal bureaucracy does, who is in, who is a political appointee and who's not a political appointee, and you give him broad pardon power over anyone who works for him who may break the law. What check is there? I mean, I ask you, I'm open, we can do a Q&A in reverse with our listeners. Hey, listeners, you tell us what the accountability is. I'm all ears. I'm all for it.
Yeah.
But that's the worry.
Right, and which is exactly why I'm going through this stuff, and I'm seeing the natural progression of all of this, and recognizing that if this is enacted, this is effectively a one-way street, which is why when you see op-eds like that one from Jared Golden, for example, saying that not only have I relegated myself to this idea that Donald Trump is going to win, but also that I'm okay with it, that is a laughable position given what we already know, what he's already promised he'll do. With that said, though, in terms of the legality of Schedule F, of this whole plan to reclassify career civil servants, Biden passed a rule that would prevent the reclassification of career civil servants from taking effect because Donald Trump tried to pass this rule in October of 2020 and obviously wasn't in the White House long enough to see it through. But that would basically, if Trump wins, that would basically be up to the Trump team to enforce. And isn't a rule only as valid as the willingness of the government to actually enforce it? Couldn't they just outright refuse and then it's basically de facto dead?
Absolutely. And I think you have put your finger on the philosophical underpinnings of Project 2025. And frankly, increasingly, I fear some of the justices on the Supreme Court, which is that the Constitution invests the executive power in the president as a singular person. And so their theory, Brian, is that not only can he disregard it, he definitionally must disregard it. That no rule can bind him, no policy can bind him, because he is the president of the United States and the entire executive branch exists only as a function of his will. As extreme and crazy as that sounds, that is the philosophical underpinning of what they're saying. So, Brian, yes, you should expect that Donald Trump and his advisors will take the position that he is not bounded by any prior administration's rules, or even, frankly, any executive branch agency rules or policies, that he is the executive branch. So it would be nonsensical to say that he's bound by it. And then that becomes a test case, right? That then becomes a test case when there's a standoff there and it goes through the court system. And the question is, where is the Supreme Court on that?
Right.
And I would have told you 2 years ago that that was a silly question to ask. And I would have told you 2 months ago it was not a silly question to ask, but that it wouldn't prevail. And after the immunity ruling, where are we?
Right. Well, how important is the enactment of this Schedule F plan to Trump's overall project of ushering in autocracy?
It is the single most important part. It has long been said that personnel is policy. That is a maxim of the executive branch. Who you put in place is as important as to what your priorities are. Why? Because you're the president of the United States and you got a lot of stuff going on, and you're not necessarily paying attention to every criminal prosecution or what the IRS is doing in terms of enforcement, or even, what political broadcast regulations are getting enforced and not enforced, right? You're worried about big policy. So who you put in place tells you a lot about what the policies will be. And look at who Donald Trump wants to put in place. He wants to put in place people who want to maximize their ability to exercise political retribution over their opponents. And what Schedule F allows them to do is to knock down the one barrier that would exist to them achieving that, which is a professionalized expert civil service. So if you take away that and you replace them with people who, if Kash Patel can replace the career civil service with his people, that's what you're going to get. If Steve Bannon can say, I'm going to decide at the Department of Justice who is being prosecuted and who's not being prosecuted by replacing career prosecutors with the people I like, now you know why there is this not so quiet buzz in and around, Democratic politics and progressive politics about, like, what does this all look like for people? What does this look like if Steve Bannon is now dictating who gets prosecuted and who doesn't get prosecuted, who gets audited and doesn't get audited?
Given these threats, I mean, these existential, democracy-ending threats that we face right now, does it not infuriate you beyond belief then that far from the media talking about this stuff that we are on the doorstep of, but like we have this new tone bullshit that's recirculating for the umpteenth time since 2015 that we hear from doe-eyed mainstream media reporters that are sitting down at the RNC thinking that this time's going to be different as Lucy pulls the football away from Charlie Brown for the 10,000th time.
Yeah, I find it incredibly frustrating. Let me be clear. The effort to assassinate Donald Trump was absolutely appalling and needs to be condemned strongly in every possible way. But what happened after that? It was the Democrats who were responsible, and the Republicans sold T-shirts. The fact is that the tone that is going to come out of the Republican convention is the same tone that went into the last Republican convention that we saw after 2020, that we saw in 2021, in 2022, in 2023. The Republican Party and Donald Trump are a party that want to put in place an America that is unrecognizable to most people today, and they want and central to that piece is having a near autocratic regime at the top of it. And I don't know what to tell the media who thinks that that there has been a de-escalation or that there is now a new, more united tone coming out of Republicans. It's just not true. It's like you and I talk about how the Republicans say that they're going to embrace vote by mail, and then I point you to 5 lawsuits that they're filing attacking vote by mail. Like I don't know what to tell. I don't know what to tell people. But if they have a new tone, no one has told the Republican Party they have a new tone.
Right. I mean, it cannot be this easy to game the refs in this country, which is not to say, I mean, it is this easy, but it shouldn't be this easy to game the refs in this country. Let's finish off with this. And I think it's important because I know that folks are going to be watching this and they're going to feel a sense of despair and hopelessness and just a crushing weight on their shoulders as we look at this stuff. And it is scary. So what do you say to people out there who are looking for some type of, something to cling on to, some type of faith as we stare down the barrel of this stuff?
Yeah, I mean, what you need to do is you need to register to vote and you need to vote. Enough with the belly aching, I mean, it's just this simple. Right now we are facing a election in November where the choices could not be starker. You are either facing what we've just been describing in Donald Trump, or you're facing a normal democracy. So vote for the normal democracy. You are facing, either having Mike Johnson, who is, the lead insurrectionist in the Capitol, in Congress, aiding, the Donald Trump's effort in the run-up to January 6th, or you have Hakeem Jeffries. You either have, Mitch McConnell and more of him, or you have Senator Schumer. So, here's my advice. Just tune everything else out. Make sure you are registered. Make sure you have a plan to vote. Make sure your friends and family have a plan to vote. And vote Democratic from top of the ticket to the bottom.
Right. Perfectly put. I mean, this is for all of the other issues that you may have, for all of the ways that you might have soured on Joe Biden or the Democrats because they weren't strong enough here or there. This is foundational. This is everything. It doesn't, if your issue is climate, it relies on having a functioning democracy. If your issue is reproductive rights or unions or wages or whatever it is, gun safety, any issue, healthcare, it all relies on having a functioning democracy at the core here to be able to push those issues forward. With that said, obviously the courts are going to be especially important right now as we move forward into this November election. So for those looking to support the invaluable work that Marc and his team are doing, please make sure to sign up for Democracy Docket. It's the free news outlet Marc founded to focus on everything voting in elections. Aside from being a great way to support them, it's also an amazing resource that I use on a daily basis to follow everything that's happening in the courts right now. I'll put the link right here on the screen and also in the post description of this video. I'm Brian Teller Cohen.
I'm Marc Elias.
This is Democracy Watch.